to help them if you see sort of any symptoms. I think basically just to create the awareness, and hopefully one day, we also want to be the happiest country in the world. We don't want to be the most depressed. We don't want to be the country with the highest suicide rate in the world. I think it started with just a feeling. It started with just a feeling of not being completely there, of feeling like, like we spoke about that pittish feeling in your stomach where, and just breaking down for no reason. And truly just feeling completely lost and not understanding what was happening to me. And I think it was the intervention of my mother, who was visiting me at that time. And I think I lived with it for a while actually. I was filming a movie at that time and I had no idea what I was going through. And I'd go to work every day. I'd literally have to pull myself out of bed and go to work. And my mother just happened to visit me, completely different context. And the day she was leaving, I remember breaking down, and I was extremely surprised actually today when I think back at how aware she was of what I was going through. And the first thing she did was to call a family friend, and Anna Chandy, who's a counselor. But today when I think back, and of course I was hesitant at that point because I wasn't aware of what I was going through. And at the same time, for me, Anna is someone who's also a family friend. So I think that's where I sought comfort. But at the same time, I don't know if I would have done the same thing if I didn't have, sort of that comfort level. But it was my mother who really sort of identified the symptoms and immediately called her up. And in one phone conversation with Anna, she sort of understood what I was going through. But at the same time, I think it's the way she dealt with me and with the situation at that point. She didn't raise any alarms. She made me feel like it was completely normal and okay, and that we will get through this. And then, of course, with her and Dr. Shan Bhatt, who have worked on me, so I think initially I was also reluctant to take medication. But I think at one point I was just extremely exhausted. I couldn't do it anymore. And I think that's when I decided to I said, okay, let me start medication. Let me accept this help that people are willing to give me. And today there's a lot more awareness. I don't think I can say that I'm completely over it, but it's always a fear at the back of my mind that I might always have a relapse because it's been such a bad experience for me.
What was the most, I remember you telling me that you felt that pit in your stomach, you felt empty, you felt directionless, that you would lock yourself in your vanity van and sometimes just cry, and you did not know why you were crying. That sometimes it helped to have people around, but sometimes it was the exact opposite. That sense of being closed in by a crowd when you're feeling isolated within yourself.
Yeah, it helped having people I was close to and familiar with. It was comforting to have them around because then I could break down if I felt like, and if I had questions or thoughts in my head, I wouldn't hesitate to ask. But at the same time, if I was in front of the media or at an event, which happened many, many times, that's when I'd feel a bit suffocated because I didn't want to break down in public. And this is before I made up my mind to go public with what I was dealing with. Today, if that happens to me, if I ever go back to that space, and I hope I don't, I don't think I'd think twice about exposing the way I feel. And I think a large part of one's road to recovery is to accept what you're going through, and to not challenge it, but to embrace it. And to actually allow your body and your mind to go through that experience and know that there is a road ahead. that will get you out of all of this. And it's not an individual, I don't think I could have done it on my own. I think it's very important to have that support system. So while, people credit me for coming out and speaking out, I think it's equally important for caregivers to acknowledge, and for us to acknowledge that it's important for them to be with us on this journey.
Now, before I get Dr. Duraiswamy in, I want you to talk a little bit about the continued stigma. The continued stigma associated with mental health issues, with depression in particular. Even today, if I were to be honest, in terms of eliciting responses here, even in this room with very educated, very aware people, in drawing rooms you will hear loose and idle chatter saying, oh, why is Deepika depressed? She has everything. She has money. She's fame. She has talent. She's going places. She's, depression is treated as a indulgence. Like, only people who have no real problems are depressed. So when you came out in that conversation and millions of people saw it online, on television, read about it, were you worried that the people were going to be horribly mean? And were some people horribly mean?
No. I don't think anyone was mean, but I didn't even think about it. I didn't think about the repercussions. I think
you didn't have a moment of how will this impact my public image?
No, not at all. I think for me, the idea really was to just change the way people in India and in the world look at mental illness and, give it the respect that it needs. I think the idea really was to just change the conversation, because I had experienced like literally a pre and post, and I lived with it for a couple of months without sharing it with anyone, and then today I feel so much lighter and so much better when I've come out and I've spoken about my journey. And I know a lot of other people who do. There's not a single day where I've probably not met someone who has come up to me and said thank you for sharing the story. But what's also helped them is the fact that they've then shared their story with someone saying, I know what Deepika's been through because I'm going through the exact same thing, and they instantly feel a lot lighter.
What was the toughest thing about that phase of your life? Was it feeling like nobody's going to understand? Was it the sense of losing control? Was it the sense of, surrendering almost? Like you almost have to surrender to it before you can get better. You can't fight it. A lot of people think it's mind over matter, but actually depression is matter of a kind, and I'm going to talk to the doc about it in a second. But what was the toughest thing about that phase of your life?
The phase itself. I think before the intervention, I think before I understood, before my mother saw it, before anyone else saw it, to have to wake up every morning, to drag myself to work, to put on this face like everything's okay, when deep down inside I had no reason why I was where I was and what I was doing, and life just it felt like there was no purpose. I didn't feel like it made absolutely no sense. Just life made no sense. So for me, I think that was the toughest part.
How many other people around you might be living with that? So can you speak a little bit to how losing that friend maybe in a sense began your own journey of self-discovery of what you were going through? I'm not saying that was the cause of your depression.
Yeah.
I'm saying it probably helped you to uncover it.
Well, he was a friend of a friend, and for me, someone I had met socially many, many times. But I think that was when I decided to sort of speak up and to do something about it, because I was seeing so many people around me. Now that's just one instance. We wake up today, we read the papers every single day. There's a headline. And my heart aches because it's preventable. It's absolutely preventable. And I think a large part of also the stigma comes from the fact that in schools, we talk about physical education. We have physical education classes. I had physical education in my school. But we didn't have anything to talk about mental health. not one session, not a class, it's not part of the curriculum. So I think if we included that in the curriculum and we introduce just the idea of the importance of mental health at a school level, there will be no stigma, because it's the same way as a child you're educating me about so many other things. So educate me about the importance of mental health the same way we talk about the importance of physical health. But yes, I think it was that one experience, but it was many other, of course my own experience, and then to see someone who I'd known for so many years, and like I said, you see it all around you, and I've been there, so it hurts to know that maybe in a matter of moments, or maybe some sort of intervention by friends or family member, or maybe that moment could have passed and maybe things would have been very different today.
And we're actually talking about saving lives here. We're not talking about something self-indulgent. We're talking about suicide. We're talking about people who feel, and this happened to your friend or friend of a friend, but you yourself had reached that perilous point where you were like, I don't want to get out of bed and go through my day. This life doesn't make sense to me. And that is an isolating, and actually it's a very dangerous, I want to underline how dangerous that sentiment is.
It is. I think it's so important, having been there, I think it's so important to identify that moment in your life and to not fight it. It's so important to just accept, embrace, talk to somebody about it. I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong. I don't mind if it's wrong diagnosis. I don't mind if I feel like I'm depressed, but I actually go to a doctor and he feels, or a specialist feels, I'm not depressed. I'd rather be in that space than underestimate what I'm going through. When we have a fever, we don't think twice about, I'm not talking about medication necessarily, but when we have a fever, when we have a cold, we don't hesitate to pick up the phone and talk to someone, or casually mention to someone that I'm feeling feverish today, my throat is aching today. So why don't we talk about how my mind is feeling? I'm not feeling well today. I'm physically fine, but my mind's not there. Why can't we talk about it the same way?
So why did you resist the medication? And the reason I'm pushing you on this is because I know Dr. Duraiswamy will bear me out on this. This is the most common. Even people who are able to bring themselves to a doctor and say, help me. There is a resistance. The mind, we treat our mind as something, we ourselves treat our mind as something different. Yeah. Like if somebody tells us we're diabetic and we need Januvia or insulin, we will take it. And we'll say we'll also exercise and we'll lose weight and we'll do all of that, but we'll take the medicine. But when it comes to mental health, we resist. Why did you resist medication at first?
I think it's the same stigma that we're talking about. It's the same stigma that what if I'm already not feeling great, and what if this thing messes with my mind even more? It's the same. It was just the stigma, nothing else. And the day I overcame that, I'm fine.
Because what a lot of us who think of ourselves as reasonably intelligent, we say we know ourselves. We know ourselves, and what are you going to tell me, some stranger sitting on a couch, that I don't already know about myself? Talk a little bit about that process. I mean, how difficult is it to walk into this room and start bearing your soul to another person who, even if in your case was a family friend, there are still barriers. And the thing about taking help for depression, it's a little bit like when we get a surgery. We don't care if our doctor sees us nude, because we have to take our clothes off and get that anesthesia and get that treatment. So this is like bearing your soul. It is bearing your soul to somebody, and it's tough. So talk a little bit about that process of getting help and the obstacles you had to jump over within yourself.
I think for me, there was this stigma before.
Not once you started.
Yeah, but Barka, once I made up my mind, once I decided that, I'm done. I can't live like this anymore, and I want to get better. I need to get better. And then it was a deep dive. There's no halfway. I don't know if there is, but it wasn't for me. So the day I decided to then seek help and speak about it, and speak to my parents, speak to my sisters, speak to my doctors, then I'd share everything with them. So there was no,
No barriers, no holding back?
No. Every question that they asked, everything they wanted to know, past, present, whatever they wanted to know, I shared everything with them.
But that's unusual because a lot of people, even if they're able to cross the first hurdle, I don't know if you can bear me out on this, the second step is tough, right? So you say, okay, I'm depressed, I'm enlightened enough to know that this is a problem, I need help. But do I really want one person to know everything intimate? When I say intimate, I mean things in my head that I may not have shared even with my parents or my sister. But I now need to share with this doctor to get help.
No, I think it's a very important point. Deepika, of course, was working with people you already knew and trusted and highly qualified individuals. So part of what you're talking about is called the therapeutic alliance. And it's the job of a skilled counselor or a psychiatrist to establish that alliance. And you have to get a read on the person. So, there's a saying in medicine, you don't treat the disease, you treat the person who has the disease. You want to know, is this person open-minded to a biological view of depression? Is this person open-minded to more a psychological view? What are the triggering factors? What are the positive strengths? What are the weaknesses? You want to boost the positive strengths of the person to make them feel comfortable before you can introduce sort of the core therapeutic, psychotherapeutic elements. So there's a process. It may take a little longer for some people, as you pointed out, but eventually they'll open up. That's why psychotherapy is not a quick fix like 1 day or 2 days. It may take several sessions over 12 weeks. And then sometimes people have to get periodic therapeutic counseling sessions for months or years.
Deepika, one of the things we didn't speak about is, why did you decide to go public? The foundation I'll come to, but you didn't confine to sharing your story to your mother and father and your therapist. You actually took it out to the country, to the world, and that could not have been easy. And I remember one of the things you said was that if I can change even one life, this was worth it.
Yeah.
But you must have wrestled with that choice at some point. Do I keep it within the home? Do I take it public? And I bring it back to the fact that you live in the public gaze, which makes your going public with it a different narrative than from, if she went public with it. So what made you say, not just am I going to get better, I'm going to tell this story to everybody who cares to listen to it?
I think it was at multiple levels, Barkha. I think one, like I said, after having been through what I did, if I could share my story and if anyone in the world heard me and identified with what I went through and could come out of it or understand and, if I could make a difference to at least one life, I felt at that point I'd, all of, going public, speaking about it would be justified. I also felt like the narrative around mental health in India needed to change. And I can do that today, the very reason why we're sitting here today. Because I felt like when I hadn't, and like I said, I was also working at that point, I was like, why can I not tell someone when someone asks me how am I doing? Like the film that you just saw before we came in is, I think what got to me was when people were asking me how are you doing? And one day I thought, are they really asking me how I'm doing? Do they actually have the time to listen if I said I'm not feeling okay? Will they actually give me that moment and understand what I'm going through, or
is it just perfunctory?
Is it just superficial? When we ask people, how are you doing? Is it just superficial? Is it just, formality because that's the way we've been brought up? Like just ask and, yeah, I'm fine. Oh, great. Everything's great. Is everything really okay? And I wasn't okay. So I think that's what really got to me, because I wasn't okay. And it reached a stage where I was like, why can't I just tell people that I'm not okay? It was just that. And that's when I reached out, and that's when I felt like I needed to talk about it. I felt like, because I felt bottled, I felt caged, I felt like I needed to fly or swim or just not be boxed and to feel free, and I feel so free today.
Fantastic.
It is, you underplay, I think, the courage that you have shown. You have shown extraordinary courage. I've said that to you a million times. I will say it a million times more. Why the foundation?
Because I felt like just talking about it, I want to help people. I want them to understand what they are going through. We want to create awareness. We want to tell people that it's okay to feel the way you do if you're feeling a certain way. It's absolutely all right. So to create the awareness, to reduce the stigma, which is going to take us many, many years. Having said that, I think in just the last 2 years, I feel like the conversation has really shifted. Is it going to happen soon? Maybe not. But are we moving in the right direction? Most definitely. So to create the awareness, to reduce the stigma, to go into schools and colleges and educate teachers, educate students, educate parents that there is something like this that exists. It's there, it's happening all around us, and do something about it before it's too late. Suicide, depression is the next big epidemic to hit the world, if it isn't already. And reach out to corporates, reach out to the corporate world. Tell them that it's so important in your workplace to identify what you're going through because the pressures are so high, to identify the people that you work with, to help them if you see sort of any symptoms. I think basically just to create the awareness, and hopefully one day, we also want to be the happiest country in the world. We don't want to be the most depressed. We don't want to be the country with the highest suicide rate in the world.
So workplace, we are at the India Economic Summit of the World Economic Forum. It is a question for workplaces. We are entitled to medical leave, but I don't know that workplaces offer medical leave for depression.
No.
Yeah, this discrimination is part of the stigma again.
You'd call it discrimination?
I think so. There's no other word, that I can use for it. Look, at the end of the day, there's no economic wellness without mental wellness. That's the core of any economic summit, is that we're in a cognitive era. It's not the building of a company that has real value, it's the cognitive skills of their employers. And ultimately, you can't perform if you're not well. So any company that's sort of short-sighted and doesn't offer leave or for mental health, or doesn't offer insurance for mental health, I think it's shooting itself in the foot.
Yeah.
So the World Economic Forum has actually developed a toolkit for businesses focused on depression. They've actually done pilot studies at a number of companies around the world. So if anybody here is interested, any corporates here in the audience are interested, that would be a useful resource.
What would you advise people in charge at workspaces? What is the foundation, Deepika, for example, encourage? What do you say to an employer? Let's say there's an employer in this room and she or he want to know, my colleague comes to me and she says, I'm depressed.
Right.
What should be my professional yet empathetic response at the workspace?
So to the individual, or are you talking about at a corporate
as a policy
level?
But I'm just taking an individual example. But what would you advise on policy?
Well, as policy level, first of all, I think public-private partnerships are going to be very key, so they could partner with a foundation. There are plenty of foundations. There's Banyan, there is Spark, there is Deepika's foundation. I think education is going to be very important, setting in policies that are anti-discriminatory against people with mental illnesses. Encouraging employees to volunteer, because volunteering itself builds resilience against future mental illnesses. Making available resources for people to get care and accurate diagnosis and treatment, giving appropriate vacation, and making sure when they come back from the treatment of their illness that their career trajectory is not shifted and derailed.
So let me just be the cynic here and say that when you talk about public-private partnership, is one thing for foundations like Deepika's and others to join hands with the private sector. But when you talk about people who don't have resources, who don't have money, the
like
poor,
small businesses? You mean?
no,
Okay.
rural India
Rural
or poor people. If you take a trip to the All India Medical Institute, you have people waiting out in line whose children are dying of cancer and they cannot get time with the oncologist because the public health system is so strained.
I'll make a comment.
Can we convince the government of India to actually turn the public health system towards depression, given the social stigmas, given the overstretched nature, given the absence of resources?
Yes.
Yes.
And Deepika will also comment, but I'll give you 3 examples. In the US, about 10 years ago, the FCC, which is the Federal Communications Communication, introduced a new Lifeline Act, which made sure that smartphones were available to every poor person in the US to call. The city of Birmingham and London created a public-private partnership with about 20 companies, raised $125 million, started a 24/7 hotline for college students and high school students to call in on mental health issues. They also started a special college where people who have mental health and drop out of colleges can catch up with their curriculum and go back to the original college. New York City has started a $30 million public-private partnership to take care of mental health amongst the homeless and amongst the poor. So yes, it's entirely possible. There are hundreds of corporates here who would be glad to support such an endeavor, but maybe you want to add to that.
No, I think similarly, I think it's important for people at workplaces, policymakers to sort of, like we were talking about leave, you know, if I'm diabetic, if I have a surgery, if I'm pregnant, if I'm X, Y, and Z, you will be allowed medical leave. Whereas if you go to your boss and say, I have depression, he's more likely to say, I'm going to have to sack you.
Yeah.
We need to normalize that. We need to treat it like anything else. I think a large part of the stigma, or a large part of, even if there's people who want to come out and seek help, you need to confide in your boss, or you need to confide. I think there's the fear of losing your job.
Look at your own life. If you had gone to a film producer and said, I can't do this film right now, or because I'm depressed, what do you think would have the response would have been?
Maybe there are people who haven't offered me films because they think I'm depressed and I can't act. I don't know.
You think that's happened?
I doubt it.
Maybe. I don't know. It has.
And did that make you ever regret going public?
I'm in a good space because I can choose the movies.
No, I know.
I want to do.
I know.
But I don't think everyone has that luxury of choosing where they want to work, when they want to work. So it's important for the organizations to understand that we need to treat this the same way as anything else. I think it's equally important to have frequent sessions in your corporate offices about the importance of mental health. I think it's important to have a tie-up with a counselor, or maybe have an in-house counselor, or maybe not a psychiatrist, but it's important to have an in-house counselor when your staff is burnt out, they need to talk, they want to speak to someone, somebody's there, or at least make them aware that they should. And I feel today it's important to just seek help of a counselor anyway, because our lives are so fast-paced with technology, with so much going on in the world. I don't think there's any harm in just seeing a counselor anyway, because...
Did you continue to see a counselor even after you got better?
Yeah, on and off.
Whenever you needed to.
I know a lot of my friends who've never experienced anxiety or depression, but it's very important for them to see a counselor, to see their counselor every now and then. A lot of people do. And we need to normalize that as well. A lot of people say, I have a meeting. You lie about it. I'm in the middle of something, I'll call you back. Or just lie and say I went to a general practitioner. We need to normalize it. It has to be as normal as anything else.
So I'm going to open